Hmm. Hmm. No, I'm just gonna talk. Just gonna shoot the breeze. Just gonna say what I feel about the game after having played through it a couple times on hardcore. Resident Evil 4 Remake. I guess I have a list of things here. I got a list of things. Not like a hard script or anything, but I will be talking about it. So let's go into detail. It's weird hearing my voice without the headphones on. I'll be honest. But first, I'll go into the good stuff. Right, the stuff I find unequivocally good. By the way, this is all subjective, mind you. That's not a license to not comment on this, or I might think I'm immune to counter argument or anything. So I would appreciate someone calling me out on my nonsense if they feel I am wrong, because it is subjective, and that's kind of the point of it being subjective, is conflicting opinions. So I guess we'll go into it. What I feel is good about the game, what do I enjoy? The knife parry system. Yeah, okay. So Leon's movement in the game is still pretty stagnant. It's much better than the original, right? The original, but we'll get into the issue about game speed later. But due to his movement being somewhat limited, the knife is there to help compensate, give him a defensive option, which is good. It's good. It feels good. Generally, feels pretty good. There's some hitches here and there throughout the game. There's some hitches, but generally it's pretty good. Since you can't evade the attack, it's all about defending, standing your ground, that sort of thing, parrying the attacks. That's pretty cool. There's also the ducking aspect where, like, so Leon has like a crouch now, so like you can stealth through segments, but also if you just crouch at the right time, some attacks will go over you. Like, I didn't realize this until like my second playthrough, but when you're fighting, by the way, there's gonna be a massive amount of spoilers. I'm going to talk about the entire game. During the Mendez boss fight, his second phase, where he's like in the rafters and he's throwing wooden beams at you, flaming wooden beams, you can duck those. You can straight up just, and they'll go right over your head. He's aiming for your temples. I don't know why he would do that, but that you can just duck them. You can literally, you see he has flaming beams in his hand, just push B and he will just miss all of them. You don't have to run back and forth like I did my first time, and I've seen like pretty much everyone do. It's weird. Anyway, my issue with that, even though it's a good thing, I do have an issue with it. My issue with it is that they don't really explain the ducking very clearly. They explain the knife parry pretty adequately, but they don't really go into detail about the ducking system. And that would be kind of appreciated, because it's like the other half. It's like the same problem I run into with like Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, where it's like, okay, half of the defensive option is parrying, but the other half is the evasion move that you get, right? Which you have to purchase, is super cheap, but if you're not really told, you might be like, dude, why are these guys fucking smacking me? I can't parry these attacks, I just have to run away a bunch. That's not great. And then you get to through all of the main game and then all the DLC, and you're in the final boss fight of the Jetstream Sam DLC, and then you realize, oh. So a little more explanation with that specifically, because it's not intuitive. But I feel that if it was explained adequately, it would be a fun like system overall. Like I think that's actually a decent idea for a system, but just not explained clearly. The side quests I liked. They're inoffensive at worst, and at best they're kind of quirky and fun. Like I really like the one where you go throw an egg at Salazar's family portrait, because it gives you like this weird hint, because they give you a golden egg in his throne room, right? And it's a really expensive egg you can sell for a lot of money, and if you eat it, it heals you to full, that sort of thing. But you can also equip eggs, and you can throw eggs. And if you throw this golden egg at Salazar, on like standard and below, it'll kill him instantly when in the boss fight. And on hardcore and higher, it does like 70%. So that's cool, right? It's funny and goofy, and I appreciate it. Most of them are kind of there. They're like, shoot the medallions, which in the first one it was just like that initial part for the Punisher. Yeah, you got the Punisher for it. But now it's like they're all throughout the game, and it's like, okay, this is fine. It's inoffensive, is what I said. There's the get the mice one, like, but the unique ones are a lot of fun generally. Pretty much most of the boss fights are distinct improvements from the original. Like Del Lago is still a bit like wonky on controls, but is infinitely better on controls than the previous one, than the original. Like Mendez is a lot of fun. I wasn't a fan of Salazar or Sadler generally. Salazar, they're trying out this like weird rope tech, like engine wise, where like he's shooting tendrils around and it's like using like, the rope physics, and it looks really weird, and that's fine for the most part. But like the boss fight is just kind of awkward. The arena I think is the big problem there, but for the most part, it's much better than it was in the original, where it was just the big tendril eye thing. You shoot it, it's like ah, and it goes away, and then the little hatch opens up, the little Gundam hatch opens up, and there's Salazar, and just and you just shoot him right in his face. Right, like it's much better. It's much more dynamic, right? And then the Sadler fight is very similar in terms of visual design, but like he's bigger, he's like breaking shit, he's running around, he's summoning Novistadors, the bug guys, right? Like, and then it just ends up being kind of clunky and weird, particularly because he's so like, it's so hard to hit his eyes. He doesn't stand still, but that's mostly fine. It's just like a difficulty in like targeting thing. That's fine. It's a culmination of everything you've been doing in the game, right? The thing that's the problem is that he doesn't shut up. He talks the whole fight. My first playthrough, I have this streamed. My first playthrough, I turned off the voice dialogue, like the dialogue's volume. I turned it all the way to 0 because I couldn't stand him talking. He talks too much. Oh my god. And guess what? I had infinitely more fun once I shut him up. Weird, right? It's weird. For the most part, though, mechanically, the fights are a lot of fun. Like the El Gigante fights are good. They took out U3, so can't really comment on that, but yeah. The character writing. The character writing is awesome. In the original title, it was more of like a B movie, and that was great. Like, don't get me wrong, I love that. But this one, it feels like it's trying to be more serious in tone in terms of the writing. It doesn't necessarily achieve that in a lot of places, but it's trying, right? And the character writing, like the dialogue between the characters, heartfelt, wonderful, I believe it. Everyone's charismatic, it's perfect. Ashley goes from being like this completely frustrating, sandy cheeks, Cindy from Jimmy Neutron, that's the voice actress is doing those voices, anyway, like frustrating, screechy, help me, Leon, to this actually kind of appealing college student who has her own wit and charm and is capable in some capacity in her own right, even though she's like way out of her depth, but she's trying, right? Then we have Luis, who was great in the first one, didn't get a lot of time generally, but he was great in the first one, and in this one, he's even better somehow. They made him even better. He's so good. He's awesome. Because, okay, so in the original, he was more of like a, sort of like this mysterious Spaniard, sort of like that was really like the only defining characteristics of him. Like he was trying to make amends for something, but it was like not exactly clear until like, oh no, he worked on the project and he's trying to help you because you're trying to stop the project and he like regrets working on it. So that makes sense, right? This one, you get a little bit more of like his inner personality a little bit. And he's like, his backstory now that they fleshed out, and he's more like kind of goofy, like geeky, like nerd. It's a lot of fun to engage with that. He's like really into Don Quixote, right? Especially as a child he was. Like, yeah, he's great. He's great. I really appreciate Luis in this one. The rest of the cast, I'm sad to say, is basically just like the same with a lot of the camp removed, which was a lot of the fun in the original title, I'd have to say. A lot of the camp, not all of the camp, which is a weird point. We'll get to in a second, but they're mostly just like played drier and straighter. It's okay. They're not bad. There's no bad characters generally. People have a problem with like Ada's voice actress, I guess, in terms of her execution. I didn't really have a problem with it. Like I didn't see like the need, like maybe it was dry, I guess, in comparison, but like nothing really jumped out at me in regards to her performance. So in terms of like bad aspects to it, like it was fine. Like I don't, maybe it was just like what people's experiences versus mine. If you have some sort of experience to explain why you really don't like her voice acting, or maybe you even have clips specific clips, sure, please, by all means, let me know. But yeah, I didn't see an issue generally. Oh yeah, they brought back a lot of the iconic encounters. They brought back a lot of the specific rooms and some room designs and enemy encounters from the original title. They didn't just like revamp everything and be like, okay, we know better, right? Like the fucking, is it Garrador? Is that what they are? The Wolverine guys with the claws and they're blind, right? Those guys brought back the initial one that's like way revamped and is really cool. They brought back the twin version of those guys. Like there's two of them and there's like a bell in that room. They brought back the water room. Like just a bunch of small things too. Like there's the camp in the island where originally you like drop down in this tent to like an underground like tunnel that takes you around. They still have the tent and a treasure in there, but they got rid of the underground thing. But that section's still there, right? You can recognize like, hey, this is that part, and that's really cool. I really appreciate that. Not like it's a particularly amazing thing, but it helps to like solidify like where it's coming from. And it's like, okay, this is not exactly one-to-one, but you can see where it comes from, and it shows it like keeps it like grounded as a remake, as opposed to this is us trying like Village, right, which is effectively a spiritual successor. It's weird that they went with Village, a spiritual successor to RE4, and then they immediately followed it with Remake. So a bit weird, not bad, just odd. Okay, that's all the overtly good things. There's probably more things, but those are like the overtly good things that I wanted to talk about. If you have other good things you want to talk about, please, by all means, say so in the comments. But that's all I really want to talk about in terms of good things. There's some mixed things that I want to talk about that I'm not on board with, but I don't think are bad, right? Like these are things that I don't think are like actually bad, but I don't like them. Oh, the ammo crafting. In the original title, you had to like live and die by the AI director, who would dictate like what ammo you found depending on what guns you were using, which I thought was fine. It worked great. But now you're having to like pick and choose, and there's an interaction to it, which I objectively think is a good idea in terms of like having player engagement and having the player decide, hey, here's some ammo, or here's some pieces of ammo. I don't have a flashbang. What if I fight the head pop tendril guys? I need at least one flashbang, so I gotta give up some of that. I can't make a shotgun shells, because if I do, then I'm gonna have to spend 2 shotgun shells on one of those guys. So it's like, oh man, we're gonna have to make some flashbang. Like you're making choices, which is good. But personally, I liked it when it wasn't my choice. Like take the responsibility out of my hands in that regard. But I don't think it's a bad thing. The shooting galleries. Mostly the rewards. In the original title, by doing it to a certain capacity, by doing it well, you unlocked bottle cap figurines, which are figurines that like stand on bottle caps, and you push a button and they'll make like a dialogue line, a voice log. They'll say some iconic line like Leon or ballistics or I'm coming, Ashley. Anyway, they'll say something. Right, but also if you collect all the bottle cap figurines up like a row, because there's like multiple rows, then you get like a cash reward. So the incentive was do the shooting gallery, get a big cash reward that you then use to upgrade your guns. Right, you do it once and then you're done. Now they've changed it so you don't get a cash reward, you don't get bottle caps. Instead, you get these little tokens that you then put into a gacha machine to then get this randomly assorted like trinkets that you can then attach to your attaché case, which then give you passive effects, which that's fine for the most part, but then it gives you this incentive to constantly play the shooting gallery, which is objectively a good thing. Which is generally a good thing. It gives you a reason to go back to the shooting gallery multiple times, whereas in the original, once you finish the shooting gallery, other than just playing the game, there's no real reason to go back to the shooting gallery. Why would you go back? You got the reward. With the new one, you have a constant incentive to keep going until you get all of the trinkets. Technically, you could just farm infinite money in there. It's not efficient in the least, but you could. The trinkets themselves, I feel, are poorly made, because half of them are like effective in the field. Okay, half of them are effective when you're playing the game. The other half are effective when you're talking to the merchant. Okay? and you can unequip them and re-equip them. You can change out your loadout when you're at a typewriter, when you're at a save point, right? When you're at a save point, you can switch them around. And since there's always a typewriter within like 5 feet of the merchant, you can always switch it out for the merchant set that you're gonna be like, okay, I get 5% off, or I get 5% more money for selling resources, or I get 10% off on upgrades, or you know, like whatever the merchant upgrades are. This creates a weird problem where you go to the merchant. Oh, I want to put on my merchant set. So I go to the typewriter, I go into customize, I look through my extensive list of trinkets that I've collected, I find the ones that I want to equip, I equip 3 of them, right? I go to the merchant, I purchase things, I realize that I missed one, or I wanted to do 4 things instead of 3 things, do the 3 things, leave, go back to the save point, swap out my trinkets again, go back to the merchant, purchase the thing I wanted, go back to the save point after I purchased everything, re-equip the trinkets, hopefully I remember what they were, re-equip the trinkets that I'm going to use to go out into the field, and then we're good to go. It's this very clunky system that I feel like there should have been like 2 separate trinkets. Like there should have been like passive trinkets that are always on, and then active equipable trinkets. And I think the passive ones should have been like the merchant stuff, like, hey, you got the one that makes it so the merchant will talk 90% less. That's going on there. Right? Oh man, that's great. Just turn him off. He talks too much. I'm sorry. I love him. He talks when you switch a menu, and you're constantly doing that. Like, oh my god. Oh my god. The man is stance canceling talking. Maybe it's just me. Maybe that's just a me problem about the whole like talking thing, because I've noticed it. Like, okay, Sadler and now the merchant are talking too much. It's like, maybe it's just me, but like it bothers me. It bothers me. I stopped playing Atomic Heart because the characters would not shut up. I deleted it on stream because like they would not stop talking. And it was useless exposition too, right? So at least it had like a point kind of in like world building, whereas like the merchant and Sadler are just like filling dead air, right? Anyway, for the trinkets, just punctuating the trinkets. They're good. I like the customization of the trinkets. I don't like their implementation. The gem sockets, though, the socketing gem system. In the original title, you would find sellable items. You'd find treasures, right? And some of those treasures were incomplete. You had to find the other missing pieces of them. That's neat. Things like you would find the incomplete Salazar family crown. You would find by beating a certain boss, you get this very specific piece to it, and you slot that in. That feels good, right? And then you get through a certain section, and you find the final piece, and you slap it in there, like, oh, I got the full crown, yeah. And it incentivized you to go out and defeat certain enemies. It's like, yeah, I could run away from the Verdugo, or I could kill him and get the specific family emblem thing that goes into the crown, which gives me a big chunk of money, or it gives me a big multiplier on that. But in the new one, all of the treasures are either like fully complete, or they have sockets. And then you also find these generic gems that you can slot in. And there's like this really cool gem multiplier system. I appreciate that. That's good. Right? That level of interaction's cool. Problem is that it's kind of solvable. Like you can solve it. Like, okay, out of the gems I have, what assortment will give me the most money? This one, that's the correct one then, right? For the moment. It's like, oh, I might want to hold off in case I get a bit. No, who cares? Oh, at most, you're going to get like 5,000 more pesetas. Like, it's really not that big of a deal. Like, generally just, yeah. There's this interesting interaction, though, between like the red barrels and the rubies, like the cheapest gem and the most expensive one, because they're like the same color technically, so you get like a same color bonus. So that's pretty cool, right? It's like, oh, I don't, but like the purple one and the green one are their own colors, and the blue one and the yellow one their own so like there is a game there. There is an interesting game there, so it's not bad. I just kind of preferred like the specific treasures to slot in. It felt like a sense of catharsis and like progress and success. By, oh cool, I finished I killed this guy, I got the blue Sphinx eye, and I put it in the Sphinx face. Like that felt good. And again, that's what a lot of this is this feels like this, not this is objectively bad. I did say this feels objectively blank earlier. Basically all of this is, this feels like, right, this is all about personal taste, right? That being said, let's get to the bad stuff. Let's get to the bad stuff. Okay, the things I really wanted to talk about. Thank you for staying so long to the stuff that I actually have major opinions on. Okay, so game speed. In the original title, Leon was relatively restricted in his movement. The main character was relatively restricted in his movement. You can move forward, you can run forward, you can hobble backwards, or you could turn left and right. Turn left and right. It was a sort of like tank control situation, whereas the series is known previously for like having like a CCTV camera style of camera, like watching from an angle, and the character would run through the space, and they functionally do this using tank controls, where you push up on the stick and the character will run whichever direction they're facing, and if you push left or right, they will turn in place, right? And if you push back, they'll walk backwards, so you're controlling a tank effectively from a CCTV camera. And that's translated here in the movement in which Leon, in the original anyway, in which that's how Leon moves. He's relatively restricted in how he can move. And this is represented also in how the enemies move. Because the enemies, if they're like 60 yards away, are gonna like start sprinting until they get within like 20 feet of you, and then they'll stop. And they'll just slow down. Because Leon can't aim his gun and move at the same time in the original. The pace was much slower. They gave you plenty of time to aim at specific parts with your aiming laser instead of like a weird expanding reticle that is incredibly inaccurate. Like you had plenty of time to aim and pick your shots because you kind of had to. The game was very slow by design. And then in the new game, Leon can just move independent of the camera. He can just run any which way. He can aim and move at the same time. He has an aiming reticle that expands and contracts depending on like how accurate he is at the time. And in response to this, the enemies are way faster. They're way faster. They attack way more often. They have grab moves now. So before, the enemies would not grab you. They might push you, like if you get too close, and then go for a melee attack, but they would not grab you. In this, they have a grab animation. And here's the problem with that I feel, is because of this, they create a bigger area of denial. Each individual Ganado makes a bigger area of denial, because if you get within range of the grab, you can't outrun it once you get into a certain range. So they're gonna get you, which means that they threaten a bigger area. And so it's like, okay, so I have to stay further away from them. Okay, that's fair, and I can run and aim and shoot. That makes sense. The problem is the areas really haven't been redesigned in such a way to allow for that. The areas aren't big enough for that. They're still pretty cramped overall. And you're gonna try and run away, because that's the intent. That's the intended design. You're gonna like run around and like ferry the enemies around as you're like shooting them and running away. But they wanted to recreate the village section over like the entire game, where you're just running around, chaining enemies as you're just shooting them from a distance. But it's not quite a proper translation, because the original RE4 had like a pretty close to perfect game speed. The player is a certain speed and the enemies are a certain speed to compensate. The new one, Leon got a little faster and the enemies virtually got way faster. There's just so much more nonsense going on, and they are so much faster than Leon is, that you feel slower. It's weird. In this game in which you have more control and he is more responsive generally in what he's not more responsive, is he? Anyway, in this game, it's weird. In this game in which you have more like functional control over Leon, it actually feels more sluggish because the enemies are proportionally way faster. There is another reason though. The animations. In the original title, Leon's animations were quick and snappy. There was no weird slowdown of him having to put it away, pull it out, cock it, clean the gun. Like, no. Like, just boom, 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 fire, boom, next gun, boom. It was very arcadey and felt very snappy and responsive. Here, Leon is constantly running through animations and like just can't respond quickly enough. Legitimately, it's frustrating when I'm trying to do things and he is just cycling through his animations until he's able to actually, like, it feels like they put a lot of care into these animations and they wanted people to see them and they didn't want people to cancel them. because of this, it does feel kind of clunky and slow, especially if you go back and play the original, like right after. It's like, oh my god, this is so fast. It's weird because it's slower. So yeah, I feel like the animations really prevent Leon from being as responsive as he should be. I'd prefer it if you could cancel shit much more easily, but yeah, I feel that the game speed is significantly inhibited because of it. Ooh, also, I talked about this earlier. The juxtaposition between the seriousness and the camp. And when I say camp, I mean like this dramatic theater, goofy theming or dialogue or visual design or set dressing. Basically, if something seems like overtly theatrical, right? That's like campy, which is fun. Campy stuff's fun. And in the original title, it was like a B movie. It felt like it wasn't like a proper AAA title in terms of like if it was like a movie. It felt kind of goofy and like low budget in places. In the original, there's a bit where like there's a giant Salazar statue that like is like animating, and then when you finish that section of like using it to platform and you start running across the bridge, it comes to life and chases Leon down and then falls into a pit. And the statue is still in the remake, but now it's just in like this tower and it's being worked on, and it like shoots fire from its mouth, and that's goofy and campy, but it's not the robot is chasing you through a water room, a long pathway, and then falling into an endless pit as you're doing a runaway quick time event section, right? A little bit of the camp was lost, right? All of like the goofy lines, your right hand comes off. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them were taken away. And that's fine if they wanted to be more serious. I think the issue is that they didn't stick to their guns. They were campy and trying to be serious at the same time. They kept a lot of the goofy lines, but now they don't make sense with the character. Trying to be more serious and down to earth, and also trying to be goofy, nutty, like, you're small time. Well, they don't even say the small time bit. They're trying to be more down to earth, but also being goofy and saying one-liners, and it creates a weird tonal dissonance. Personally, for me at least, I don't know, because Resident Evil games are always like, they start out relatively serious, even if it's a little goofy. They always start off relatively serious, and then by the end, you're shoving a facsimile of a penis into Nemesis's mouth and saying "suck on this" and blowing your load throughout him and killing him, right? Like, it gets over the top, silly, and goofy by the end, right? We're making dick jokes at the end, but in more recent titles, they've been trying to be really, really serious, particularly at the beginning. And I feel it's creating a problem at this point, narratively. Like, eventually these characters are going to seem like psychopaths. For the most part, they already kind of do. Oh, there's some weird minor pacing issues. Like, I say minor, and I put this in the bad section, because it might have a more wide-sweeping thing than I thought. Basically, there's a pretense, seemingly, for the fact that you were expected to have played the original title before playing this. And I have really no basis for that, other than, like, one scene, and it's... So there's a bit near the end, like in like the second to last or last chapter, I think it's the second to last chapter, in which Leon goes to rescue Ashley again. In doing so, he runs into Sadler. He's the big bad guy. Oh god, what do we do? Fortunately, Ada swoops in, and she then proceeds to shoot Sadler a bunch. He doesn't really react too much. He kind of just no-sells it, right? But then he does a bit. So in the original title, this happens as well. Ada shows up and shoots him with like a TMP. Just unloads into him. And in doing so, he like barely reacts to it. But there's a bit where she stops shooting and he starts groaning. He's like, and then it zooms in on his hand, and you see like something like moving underneath his hand, underneath his palm, under the skin. And then he like clenches his fist and he lets go, and the bullets that she had fired into him come falling out of his hand, as if he had just caught all of them basically in his skin and moved them through his hand to just drop them out very dramatically. In the remake, that scene's still there, only it doesn't get the time to breathe. She shoots him, then something happens, and Sadler has to go and move quickly, so he goes, ugh, and throws the bullets. It gets less than a second of time to work. Less than a second of time. And it feels like if I didn't know that was what was happening, I might have just completely missed that. And I only know that because I played the original title and I know what this section is. And you might catch it, obviously. Like, people aren't dumb. They can put 1 and 2 together to make 3, right? But it is given such a small amount of dramatic time. Like, they're thinking, oh, this is an unimportant bit. We should keep this because people will think it's cool from the original. But I don't want to give it any time in the scene because I have a very specific vision for this scene or something, right? Like, it feels like you need to have played the previous title to get this, and I don't know. I can't really think of any other parts in the game where that's the case, but I've played the original title, so maybe they didn't jump out at me. If you guys have any other like suggestions of, hey, this doesn't make sense necessarily because I didn't, or because if I didn't play the original, this wouldn't get the build, anything like that, let me know. Oh, this is the big one. This is my biggest one, actually. The seeming lack of care for verisimilitude in regards to enemies spawning behind you based on progression triggers or having knowledge or preparation uncharacteristic for their situation. What the heck am I talking about? Okay. In a video game, when you are moving through a level, like a specific section of the game, right? It is not uncommon for designers to put in invisible tripwires, effectively, that when you cross them, something happens. In this case, in Resident Evil 4 Remake, when you go through past a certain point, cutscenes will trigger, enemies will spawn, sound cues will play, that sort of thing. Remake has a tendency to spawn enemies behind you after you cross a certain point. And it happens super often. It feels really bad when I've walked through a room, killed everyone in the room, take a step, and then I get hit in the back of the head by an axe by a guy who turns the corner after having just spawned in around the corner because I crossed the line and threw something at me. Or a guy comes running from the front of the castle to grab Ashley because I got to the staircase, right? It happens so often where you're just running through a section and they will spawn guys behind you. Other thing that they do is give enemies, like I said, uncharacteristic preparation to situations they should not be aware of. This is like enemies sitting there waiting around a corner with an axe, like just ready to smack you. And then you cross and they're like, oh, they get you. But the thing is, they're just sitting there for years potentially, because like there's no indication that you're going that way, right? There's no indication that you're even going to go around that corner. Like a good example of this, there's a specific section early on in the village where you go through a door and in the distance you see a Ganado whose back is to you. Like, this is a regular enemy, regular human enemy, right? His back is to you, and there's like some like vertical like sandbags or something right there, and he walks forward, right behind them effectively, and you can sneak up on him. And as you're sneaking up on him, just when you're about to get him, he passes by the sandbags, and you're about to get him, and then you get hit in the side of the head because there was a guy waiting on the other side of the sandbags, literally waiting to catch you because this guy was apparently bait, I guess, right? The situation is cartoonish and weird and comical, and from a designer standpoint, fucking hilarious, right? Like, don't get me wrong, it's hilarious. The problem is that I see that a designer did this. I see that they put the guy here to catch me. My verisimilitude, as in my belief that this is real, my suspension of disbelief, me pretending that I'm Leon Kennedy and I'm getting immersed in this game, is shattered because it has not been obscured enough. The fact that someone made this video game. right? Another, like an obvious example of this, not in the game, or I'm just making this up, hypothetical. Like if you're walking through the village and you open up a door into a room and you see a poster that says like "fuck you, video game player," it's like, what? It's gonna pull you out, right? And that's bad. That's bad from like a design standpoint. You don't want that to happen, because every time that happens, there is a chance the player will not continue to play. Not out of frustration or anything, no. When they are pulled out of the experience, they remember the world around them. They remember what's going on, right? They are now not focused, intently engaged with your product. They are now pulled out like, what the heck? Oh man, I need to take a break, and they get up, and they might not come back, right? So generally, it's just not a good thing. You want to keep verisimilitude. It not only increases engagement, but it also increases endearment, I think is the word I'm thinking of. Increases endearment towards your title, right? The longer it can keep you engaged, the more a person will love it, the more a person will like it. I'm not saying don't do these completely hilarious traps, right? I'm saying you need to hide it better, that's what this is. I don't necessarily have an example, because this is a very fine-tuned process, but like, yeah, if I guess for the dudes running in thing, like put like 4 triggers and have a dice roll on like the first 3. So it's like, okay, he crossed this trigger, roll the die. If it's a 6, then the enemy spawns. It was a 4, okay, then the enemy doesn't spawn. He crosses the second one. Is it a 6? No, okay, move on. Is the third one? Is that a 6? No, it's not. Cross the last one. The last one's 100% he will spawn, right? Give it some variance so that it's not, okay, as soon as I cross this point, boom, the enemy spawns. Also, what breaks my verisimilitude, what breaks my belief in this, the sheer volume of enemies. There's so many enemies, guys. In the original title, you might fight like 4, 5, 6 enemies in a room at a time, right? 6 was like that's a lot of enemies. In this one, dude, you're fighting like 12 enemies a wave, and they put multiple waves in rooms. There's so many more enemies. And that's not even getting into like there's so many enemies that there were several rooms that I wasn't sure if it was an infinitely spawning enemy room. By the way, I don't think there are any infinitely spawning enemy rooms in the game, but the fact that I have to keep asking myself, are there an infinite number of enemies in these walls, is concerning, right? But the point is, the verisimilitude aspect is, you remember that village at the beginning of the game? Do you remember how many houses were in that village? That village could probably house like 20 people, 20, 25 people, max. And there's probably some houses in the hills around, right? Like there's like the chief house, Mendez's house, right? There's probably some houses around. You don't really see them. They're not really around. By the end of the game, I killed close to 800 enemies. And not all of them were humanoid enemies, mind you. Like there's like the bug guys, right? There's a bunch of weird monsters that you're fighting, sure. But the vast majority are human. Let's cut that down to 700. I've killed like 700 humanoid enemies in Resident Evil 4 Remake. Where were they living prior to being infected? There's not enough farmland. There's not enough housing. Where were, like in the original title, you can kind of get away with it because like, things are obscured, there's way less enemies in each encounter. Like, that's believable to a point, but there's just like hundreds of dudes. And that pulled me out to an extent. The stealth sections. The stealth mechanic is fine, because in the original title, you would do this bit basically where the enemies might not know you're there, and this makes the world feel more real because they're not all constantly waiting around corners to hit you with axes. But it led to you like sneaking up on one guy and shooting him with your gun and killing him, and then the rest of the town or castle or all of China will know you're there now, but you get a drop on him and it was okay, right? That was what you got in the original. In the remake, you can be stealthy. You can crouch and get behind guys and stab them. The knife meter? Did I not talk about the knife meter? No, I will. I will get to that. Never mind. The stealth is fine in small bursts, but there are a couple sections that are extended stealth sequences, And the problem with them is that they are on rails, effectively. Basically, either you can choose to just not do it, shoot a guy, and the entire room comes at you, and then it becomes going loud, or you can choose to do the stealth sequence, which has you follow a very specific path, and if you deviate from that path at all, you might as well have just gone loud because you aggro the entire room anyway. Right? So there's no choice. So what is the point of this section? Your choice is go loud and shoot everything like you've been doing, or follow this very specific curated path to stab a bunch of dudes and then go loud anyway because you can't get everyone. It feels weird and unnecessary, like just kind of clunky. Now we have a bunch of minor grievances. Like these I don't think these should be actively looked at, but these are irritants. These are small things. Ashley's constant grunting. Oh wait, like, just, maybe it is. Maybe I have like a sensory overload or something. Because it's stop talking. Because when you're running, and she'll get tired and she'll be like, like her boots don't fit right or something, right? It's constant. The addition of the final like dump ammo into Sadler bit, like after you beat Sadler, there's a section where he turns into a giant writhing mass of tentacles, and there's like a fucking embryo in the center that you have to like shoot a bunch, and once you've shot it a bunch, then Ada will throw the red rocket launcher and then you shoot it at him, and that ends that fight sequence. That wasn't in the original. And honestly, I don't like the direction of every single like modern Resident Evil is having some equivalent of shoot the giant final boss as it turns into a big cancerous ball thing, like mag dump. It's an RE2 remake. It was in Village. It was in RE. Wait, was it in Village? Kind of. You're shooting like her like mass at the end, the explosion at the end. It was in RE7, certainly. It's a common thing. Now it's an RE4 remake. It's like this was a remake. You didn't need to add that. It's a frightening trend, right? It'll get stale if you keep doing it. So I don't want them to keep doing it. Again, minor complaint. I don't know if this is a big deal. I don't think it's a big deal. The knife and body armor meters. Hot take. Potentially, I don't know what the discourse is on this. I don't think the meters are necessary at all. I don't think the knife meter is necessary at all. I think they could give you an infinite use knife right at the beginning, and the game would be pretty much the same. But it would feel better. But the game would feel better. Legitimately. After like the first sixth of the game, you're probably fine on knives. And the reason I say that is because every person I've seen play this game, including myself, the first, second, third, and potentially fourth upgrade they purchase for weapons is knife durability, and upgrading their pistol. No, knife durability. Fuck. God damn it. It's always knife durability. Because that's annoying and they don't want to deal with it. And no, it would not be broken or overpowered, or at least I don't think it would be broken or overpowered if you had infinite knife. You still have to do the parry. I'm still getting clobbered. I have 2 knives right now in like New Game Plus, right? I'm sitting there with 2 knives plus any boot knives or kitchen knives I find. I'm still getting clobbered. I'm still getting blasted because I'm not paying attention, or because I'm getting hit in the back of the head, or I'm getting someone's throwing dynamite. Like, you can't parry everything. The knife doesn't fix everything. Not to mention you put a perfect parry system in, so like just mashing the button gets you like back to neutral kind of, but doesn't give you anything, so it's not great. And there have been several situations I've parried a guy and then someone's hit me out of it, right? Like I've parried the guy and then the second party comes in and just slaps me with a fish or something, right? So it's not perfect overall. Like the whole process is not great. They've shortened the area of effect of your melee attacks too. In the original, when you go to kick a guy after you've like stunned him with your gun, you shoot him in the face, he's like, fine. Don't worry, I'm fine. It was a ruse. I was acting. After you've done that, you run up to him and you kick him, and it does like a big AoE shockwave around Leon that knocks everyone away. In this one, that's a much smaller window, so it doesn't give you quite the benefit you would expect, which can often lead to you running up to a guy that you hit, hitting him, expecting to hit everyone around him, and 2 guys next to him don't get affected and grab you or slap you or something, right? It's weird, because I don't think it would change anything. And by like halfway through the game, like I was saying, you already have so many like boot knives and kitchen knives, and your knife has a good enough durability to make it between point to point that it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. You're constantly repairing it, spending extra money to do that, but like, I don't think it's necessary. The body armor is a bit different though. The body armor is a bit different though, because in the original title, the body armor, once you purchased it, reduced damage by a set amount. This might lead a developer to be incentivized to increase enemy damage, because it's like, okay, we've introduced this body armor. It's going to increase the defense of the player by like 30%. Okay. So what do we do with our enemies? The enemies are just going to be doing less damage now. Okay. We could add more enemies to compensate. We could make the enemies do more damage, which kind of negates the upgrade, right? Or punishes them for not purchasing it. So it leads to a very awkward situation where it's like, okay, how do we continue to challenge them? Or they can do this thing that they did, which is effectively they give you the body armor, and then they say, sometimes they won't have it because they're gonna get hit and it's gonna go away. So we just don't change the damage. Gives them like a damage reduction effect, or a thing that'll like eat some of the hits effectively. Sure. Right? So overall, I think actually the repairing of the body armor is probably fine. Here's the thing, it feels worse, but is better, right? It feels worse, but is better for the player. And so they probably could have figured out some way to fix that, but in actual execution, it just does not feel good. But yeah, as far as the knife meter goes, yeah, get rid of it. Don't need it. I think that's everything, actually. I think that's all my feelings on it. I enjoyed the game overall. I played it multiple times. I'm gonna play it again. Do I feel that it is a good remake? No, I don't. Because my bar is the Dead Space remake now. That is what a good remake is. For a remake to be like sufficient, it has to pretty much nearly completely supplant the previous title. It needs to be, why would I play the original when the remake exists? And I loved the original Dead Space. At this point, there's a couple like funny references that you could get from playing the original, but like, it's not worth that to play that. You might as well just play the new one. Resident Evil 4 Remake, on the other hand, is such a different beast, is such a different game. And I wouldn't even say it's a better one. It's not bad by any metric. But it had a really, really big shadow to step out from underneath. And I don't think it fully did. You'll probably see people who like loved RE4, the original one, who came to RE4 Remake and were like, this is awesome, this is amazing, I love this one just as much as the original. Go back to playing the original one and eventually in like 6 months and be like, yeah, the remake's okay, but it's not the original.